And also, in between design sprints, we invite hosts to speak with us about either their professional background or some particular topics about UX design or research. So, yeah, for this month, My Path to UX, I asked Kate Lawson to be a speaker. She used to be a mentor of mine for a digital course that I was taking. I just really appreciated her work. Her background experience is also pretty cool too. I'm pretty sure you guys can all relate. Yeah, so I guess without further ado, I will let Kate intro herself and she'll introduce herself to the rest of the team. Alrighty? Off to you, Kate.
Cool, thank you. Thank you so much. That's such a lovely intro, and such an honour to be asked as well to come and talk about my career. And I hope that everybody finds this really helpful. My pathway is by no means straightforward, so yeah, hopefully it's going to be a bit interesting for you. So dive straight into it, but feel free to drop some questions, and I can't see them at the moment on my screen, but drop any question that you want to ask into me, and I will of course spend some time answering them at the end. And I've got some details at the end of this as well that you can always contact me on via LinkedIn. This is like a huge statement, right? So I was 100% conditioned at the start of my pathway into work to believe that I would go to school and I would get some qualifications and I would go off and I would do a job, and that job would be my career and I would do that for life, right? That was what I thought. It turned out the truth was quite a lot different from that for me. It was absolutely not a straight line. I'm hopeful that everybody sees the squiggle and recognises the design squiggle that I have appropriated for this, inspired by my boss actually from a presentation he did earlier in the week. But this is actually really appropriate for my pathway. And the really messy stuff at the start was really where I was figuring out what I was good at, what I was bad at, and shaping the way in which I think and the way in which I approach work in particular. And then through a pattern of career shifting and then moving into UX UI design, which is obviously where I'm at now. So it's okay, right? It's totally okay that that pathway is not a nice flat line. And this, the statement here, I spent 9 years working in the wrong job for me. I absolutely did. I worked for a very large retailer in the UK called B&Q. I did a lot of jobs there that were absolutely not the right thing for me, mostly in finance. I'm actually a part qualified accountant as well. It was absolutely kind of square peg round hole, and I did it, and I did it okay, but it wasn't right. And I think anybody who worked with me at the time would know that I got around a lot of problems by working really, really hard and really long hours, but it wasn't the right thing for me. What I will absolutely was not wasted time. So if there's anybody sat there now listening to this and going, well, look, I want to be in UX UI design, but I'm not there at the moment, then kind of the next few kind of slides, the next few bit of this talk is for you, and it's kind of all the things that I wish somebody had told me way back then of stuff, a lot more than is on this slide, but these are the really core themes that I wanted to pull out. What I learned was things that were going to set me up for the rest of my career and set me up for the things that when I did figure out what it was that I wanted to do, I was going to be able to find it a lot easier to move into it. And core amongst this were things like business skills. I learned how big business worked. I learned how to treat people, how not to treat people, predominantly because of how I myself was treated. I learned the ins and outs of financial modeling. I learned a huge amount of technical stuff that was going to lend me to be able to look at product from a business lens much further down the line. I learned how to manage management. I did have a role where I was a team leader for a while. What I'm talking about here is how you manage other people above you. You know, how if you have a really, really good manager, then you don't need to do a lot of this. If you have a really bad manager, then you probably have to do a lot of massaging to make sure that your voice is heard and that actually you get through the day not in complete survival mode. if you are in a situation where you're working with a manager and it's a difficult situation, learn as much as you can in that situation about how to manage that personality type, because it will come into force much further down the line when you're dealing with clients, when you're dealing with customers. All of that is really useful experience. And I had to do this a lot. I dealt with a lot of very difficult personalities. And you know, we butted heads, no doubt about it, but also I learned how best to handle that situation, handle myself in that situation. I learned how not to lead, and that's a really interesting one, right? Because most people want to be seen as a leader. I have learned that if you are good, you're a good leader. You're not actually trying to lead. You're not trying to be that leader. Um, you just are, and you take your team with you on that journey with you. And if you are in the presence of somebody who is a truly great leader, then they will never use that word for themselves. They will just get on and do the job quietly, and they will take people with them on that journey with them. And I think that's a super important thing to learn. I had a couple of young managers who were desperate to prove themselves, and they were all about the team. They wanted to be the leadership team, and they were awful at it, and it was just really painful. So these are really core lessons. And the one I want to touch on, the one that's really important to me, because it shaped so much of who I am now and what my career is going to become, is how to say no. And an anecdote that goes with this one. So I had a manager once, who was an absolute class act in the meeting room. And she had this ability to sit down with a group of individuals who would want her to like massage balance sheet numbers and just fudge it a little bit to make their department look better. She used to sit there and say no without ever using the word no, but by reading the room, reading body language, and just genuinely talking to people in a human way, she managed to make them come out of a meeting at the end of every month thinking that she had given something up when she hadn't given way at all, and did her best to make sure that they felt like they had been included in decision making. The truth of the matter was, the answer had always been no, was always going to be no, because she had that integrity about it. But her ability to just command those situations was unbelievable. And it's something that I still aspire to be able to do. I don't think I'll ever do it quite to her level. Now, this particular manager was also very good at, as I say, reading people, but she read me very well. And she was very good at giving me the things that I was good at, i.e., not maths, and making things look good and making things readable. So what I found myself doing a lot more of was taking a lot of awfully complex stuff and making it readable for management, making it readable for people to come to it. And this was my first sort of step away from finance and into more of a user type role, where I was starting to think about how people were going to come to this information and how they were going to read it, how they were going to use it, and what was going to happen next with it. And she was really good at encouraging that in me, to the extent where even after I left the team, she contacted me to help out on a presentation of hers. So it was always great to have that support and have someone in your corner. The other thing about that is, where I started to learn about reading that room, I was learning a lot more about psychology and how people thought and how body language affected people in that moment. So these are all the seeds that were being sown, right, in terms of where to go next. Where did I go next? I got a job without interviewing. It's a hard job. Sure, it's definitely stressful. I'm throwing constant curveballs and I have to problem solve on a daily basis. I mean, any guesses for that one? Children. Um, and it's not a dirty little secret. It definitely makes me better at what I do now, and it makes me 100% more driven to help others to break into, because I did this the hard way. I spent a bit of time after I left B&Q in maternity running my own business, and completely new skill set. So, I mean, bear in mind, I kind of left B&Q part qualified accountant and going, I want to do something creative. I want to use that side of me, but I don't quite know what that looks like. At the time, I'd been a hobbyist photographer for a number of years, and I decided to go down the line of doing post-maternity, like newborn shoots, but quite specific and quite niche to premature babies, which is what my two were. And that kind of grew and grew, and after a while I decided actually that was quite stressful, and what I really wanted to do was more the graphic side of things, because I kind of moved into that, and I consumed everything I could about graphic design. I did loads of online courses, just little ones, like the Udemy courses. Adobe had a suite out at the time of different courses, which I did, and
B,
just tried
I'll
to get really granular.
go to sleep with you in a second.
Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you.
No worries at all. So yeah, so just trying to spend as much time as I could going really granular on that side, and I got really lucky. I picked up some really cool contracts, and one of them was with a guy who did front end web design, and he was just putting together like little little websites for like electricians, plumbers, and guys doing kind of local services. And my job with him was to basically do some of the visuals for the websites, like photography and things, and select the right photos for the website and do a bit of visuals. And I spoke to him and said, there's a few websites where the pathway doesn't quite make sense. You know, I've tried using them myself, and you click on these buttons and it's taking you somewhere unexpected. I've sort of mapped out what I think it should do. And he looked at it and was like, "Oh yeah, I see what you mean. I hadn't thought about it like that. I mean, he's a web developer. He was looking at the nuts and bolts of how it worked. He hadn't necessarily looked at the user journey side of it." And he asked me to look at a few other websites that he had done in this way. And when I was talking to him, I was like, "Well, is this front end web design? Is that what I'm doing?" And he was like, "No, this is more user experience." Aha! I've discovered. What happened next? I committed to finding out everything I could about user experience. I absolutely went completely granular on it. Now there should be a little picture of SpongeBob SquarePants down here. So to exemplify my Be More Bob, apparently Figma's got it in for me tonight, along with the rest of my computing. But the important thing that I pull out in all of this is that once I discovered that UX was the pathway that I wanted to go down, I absolutely immersed myself in it. I committed to learning absolutely everything I could, so that I knew that that was the pathway I wanted to go forward, and that there wasn't going to be anything that was going to stop me from achieving at the end of it. Now, having children means I have to be incredibly well organized. When I say I read everything, I read everything is more accurate, because it's still a work in progress. There's still loads of stuff out there. It's still developing all the time. But I would take 10 minutes every single morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, to go sit in the office with a book and just read a few pages. And I did that day in, day out, just to move forward with it. The best of advice I've got that I would love to pass on is signing up for Audible. It then meant that when I did an hour-long dog walk, I could listen to books for an hour at a time, and I was digesting far more information. And actually, this is how I read, in inverted commas, Changed by Design by Tim Brown. Amazing, amazing book. It's all a bit old school, right? And the same with Design of Everyday Things by the immense Don Norman. Old school, but if you know it, it's the nuts and bolts. And then it kind of takes you to another place altogether. I'm going to use the phrase, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I'm going to touch on that again a bit later. The UX Collective on Medium, always coming up with new stuff. Definitely follow them. I, again, completely consumed the NNG website and IDEO. These are all things that I got my head into, and I still haven't come up out of that. Stuff like this, on webinars, listening to other people's experiences, how they did it, how they learned from their past experiences, how they moved forward, asking loads of questions, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and talking to them like a human being, not asking for something in return straight off the bat. I read loads and loads of job descriptions. This was my research. I wanted to know exactly if this was something I was going to do, what was it that I needed to be able to do off the bat to be able to go and do it. And then I found an excellent course provider and a great mentor and friend at Experience Haus. And this is also where I met the lovely Melanie. So from there, course really set on a separate pathway to what I was expecting. It was an excellent course. It was very hands-on, very good experience, but it opened a number of doors that I wouldn't have otherwise had. So because it was a live brief, it meant that by the end of it, I was used to dealing with clients, and I was used to working with teammates and working from an end-to-end process, asking questions, doing the interviewing. I had experience in all of that. It's a little bit cookie cutter because of course it is, you're on a course, right? But I also had going on at the time was opportunities to get involved with additional projects. And one of them was with the United Nations and the World Food Programme. What I was able to do was join a team that was already in progress, providing a solution to the Rwanda maternal health crisis. And they were designing a healthcare app that was going to help train doctors and nurses in remote areas on causes of maternal postpartum mortality. Sounds really simple. My role with the team, it sounds really simple, that's quite sarcastic. It clearly is not very simple. My role with the team was to make sure that the UI was up to scratch. And that's not a particularly easy thing when you have to consider technology that's available in these areas. We worked in Android to start with until I said, is that everything that they're going to be using, and found out that 90% of the time it's going to be old school USSD screens. And when I say old school, we're talking like the old Nokia 3110 style USSD screens. So I gained some experience in designing for those, and designing flows for those, and the user experience for those. Who knows if I'll ever need that again, but it's a very unique thing to be able to say that I've got. It was pro bono, but you throw your hat in the ring for anything that comes in your direction, because absolutely that's the thing that you need to be doing in order to gain experience. So now, by the end of that course, I've got a portfolio piece that came from the course. I've got a portfolio piece that came from putting my hat in the ring. A bit broader in terms of where to go next. So when I say be more Bob, and there should be good old SpongeBob here, I do mean be a sponge, suck up absolutely everything that you can. Absolutely every opportunity is a step in the right direction. Don't ever deny yourself that thought process. The next thing, the mindset shift. So I'm 10 years down the line from leaving university at this point. I've gone through a career that was a bit of a dead end. I learned loads, and I do have a bit of rose-tinted glasses when I look back, but I've also of stepping out into the world myself, running my own business, freelancing, and then going off and doing a course and finding the thing finally that I know that I want to do. There's still a bit of an unlock here. I started to think like a UX designer. I sort of stopped and thought, well, look, if I'm going to move down these lines, if I'm going to go put myself out there and commit to being a UX designer, I need to start thinking like one. And this is where reading some of those books really came into their own, because genuinely, once you see it, you cannot unsee it when it comes to UX. My manager and I, my boss, Jeremy, we sit quite frequently, discuss different things that we see around the place, normally physical products. We've had everything from taps to window handles, and discuss the pros and cons of whether they are the right signifier for the job, whether they're the right product for the job. And this is, once you start seeing that, you see it everywhere. And our teammates do like to take the mickey out of us just a little bit. But one of the you need to just bear in mind a little bit with this is you've got to apply it to absolutely everything. UX CV, I took myself out of I'm creating a CV that I want to show off to I'm creating a CV that somebody needs to read really quickly. What are going to be their pain points? What is the problem that I'm trying to solve with my CV? How do I do that? I UX my portfolio site. It's not live at the moment, but if anybody wants to see it, I'd be more than happy to send like a hard-coded copy for it. I took somebody on a journey through each of my case studies. It wasn't just a blurb onto the page, it was a journey into my thought process, and it was a very conscious thing to do. The way I talk through my CV is done so to highlight the UX nature of it. You're effectively getting that in sense from me now. Through in an interview, it is how do I answer this question in a way that is pertinent to giving you the information that you need most, and it becomes second nature the more you do it. It takes some practice, but it does become second nature. You have to have this mentality if you're going to be successful. You absolutely have to have it. This presentation that you're seeing now has been UX'd. I can tell start, but these headers, actually, you could just read them in isolation if you really wanted to, and it will tell you the story. These also give you a signifier as to how far through my career that I am talking. You've got them all along the way because it gives you what you need to know in any moment in time. And that's the reason why you do it, right? It worked for me. These are the roles that came up afterwards. So after finishing my first course with Haus and after gaining some experience, I took a 3-month contract with the company Beam Movement to Feel Good. They're based between New York and Sydney, and being in the UK, it meant we had some very interesting meeting times, I'm sure you can imagine. And I worked with them for a period of 3 months, building out things like their onboarding, sign-ups. Towards the end of that, I picked up another contract, a permanent role this time with Orange and Blue, who were a marketing and design agency. Unfortunately, they folded in the first lockdown. They're quite a niche audience, and lockdown basically brought it to an end. That was a great role. I had a mentorship role in there with a young apprentice who was wonderful to work with. Lots of UX UI design work for websites. I did a lot of graphic design work in that, and actually they promoted me quite quickly to be creative lead for the studio, and ran that part of it. So that was a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, because it folded, that was the end of that role. I went with the wonderful guys at Experience House and had an absolute blast being a service designer, so producing the courses for them. I was a mentor, which is how I met Melanie. I did B2B instruction work. I was a mentor for applicants on the Big Idea competition at the University of Westminster. I've seen some incredible products come through there. I was also a guest instructor for the AWS Gwent College's product design program and taught a couple of programs for some college students. So did quite a broad range of things that taught me another layer of skills on top of it. So it kind of took the whole UX UI thing and exploded outwards. Also did a course, actually slightly before that, I did product design, strategy and management, which just helps elevate that thinking altogether. So, once you're in that mindset of learning, you don't come out of it at all. Towards the end of that contract, I then decided to have a role slightly closer to home. So I'm based in the south coast of the UK, and they are still based up in Shoreditch. So the travelling was getting a little bit too much with family, but I returned to B&Q again, this time as a learner for a very short period of time. Another bit of advice: don't go back. If you leave somewhere, you leave it for a good reason, right? It was a good experience to have. They were setting up a new UX design team, and they wanted somebody who could come in and kind of hit the ground running. Able to do. The problem was, and I didn't realize it at the point of interview, is Kingfisher, the parent company, had a 40-strong team of product designers and UX UI designers. So we never actually got to touch any of the design work. It was a far more of a proposition role. One of the things that, being this far down the line and a bit sort of old as it is, I don't have time to mess around anymore. Once I realised the role wasn't going in the direction I wanted it to go in, it was a very clear and very quick decision. I need to go and find the thing that I want to be doing right now. 6 months later, I put some feelers out, and with a bit of luck, I landed on my feet very much so as a senior UX UI designer at Nourish Care. Absolutely love it. Love its pieces. It's the best job I've ever had. They're a fantastic company full of amazing people who are deeply committed to creating the best possible care and medical software available. And it's to work with them every single day to push what we can do to be better. So that's massively whistle stop, taking me right the way through. There are some things that absolutely need to be drawn out in all of this, though. And primarily leads me to what I want to do next. So I've talked to you about it not being a straight line, and you can see the line is continuing off screen for very good reason. I don't expect my career to be a straight line. I don't expect it to be simple. I don't expect it to be easy. If it was, I'd get bored pretty quickly. when I look back over the things that I've done, and the reason for coming and talking to you guys is, no matter what stage you're at, whether you are trying to break into it, if you're in a role that you don't really want to be in, or if you're somewhere where it's just not a good fit for you, there are things that you can learn all the way along, and there are things that you can draw out and skills that are going to help shape where you go and what you do next. CV, and I talk about my experiences with a very heavy UX lens, because that's where I am now, and that's what I'm able to look back and draw out of all of that. But as I was sown many years ago, with a brilliant manager who could do it, and who just flicked that switch in my head into looking a bit broader than the initial problem in front of me, and effectively encouraging me to go do the thing that was right for me. When you leaders in your life, hang on to them and cherish them very much so, because they'll be the people who help shape what happens for you going forward as well. And if they're really good, they will stick around for a while and make sure that you land on your feet the other side. Getting a good mentor, I 100% think is going to be a life changer, and can completely change your pathway as well. Incidentally, I get messaged about 5 times a week from different people asking, one of a number of things. So if I get 5 people of a week, I'll get 3 people saying to me, could you give me a job? Of those, maybe one of them will go away, think about it, come back with a bit more of a thought process about it. And I normally say no quite nicely. Another 2 people will come back and say, I don't really know what UX is. Could you talk to me about it? And of course I will. I'll give the time of day to anybody who just wants to ask some questions. Absolutely happy to. And another one will come to me and they'll have some ideas, and they'll just want a bit of shaping and a bit of, do this, how do I break into it? And those guys are golden nuggets completely, in terms of being able to help them forward. And it's everything that I love about this job, because we absolutely need to help other people break in. It's a growing industry. And just, if you do approach somebody on LinkedIn, do it in a really thoughtful way. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So the other end of this line, I don't expect it to be a straight line. I expect it to become more squiggly and more complicated, because actually I have no idea where it's going to go. I want to move up. I want to do more product central stuff, but I've got a lot to learn, and that's where this squiggle comes back again. This is the learning process now. I've figured out what I want to do and what I want to learn, but now it's all about getting under the skin of that and progressing and moving forward and pushing the boundaries and thinking how we can do things a bit differently. So that's what my future looks like. And this is the same question that I ask anybody who comes to me on LinkedIn and anybody who wants to talk to me about mentorship. A product that you've noticed. Is it a good product? Is it a bad product? Why? And if you could do it, if you could design it, what would you do differently, and what have you learned from it? I'll always ask that question, and I will genuinely ask you that question if you do contact me on LinkedIn, is because I want to know whether you are thinking about the world in terms of product, and in terms of the user experience, and in terms of how something can exist to simplify. We see it all the time on LinkedIn, right? Where people post up an option A and an option B and vote for which one you think is right or wrong. I tend not to get involved in those things. I'll have a look through the comments generally. The reason why I highlight this is I saw one the other day that kind of made me shudder a little bit. There was another senior UX UI designer who posted one up and asked for some feedback on it. I'm still not 100% convinced that there was a problem that needed solving in the first place. It was a phone number picker, and he had created a sliding dial for it. So instead of inputting your phone number, you slid a dial, and it slid from 0s to 9s. Really a need for that, I don't think, personally, would be my view for it. But the commentary was the most interesting part of all of it. People were coming back and saying exactly what I've just said in various different ways and coming up with different suggestions. But the guy who posted it, the senior, got really hostile. I've put this up there to show that I'm better than the rest of you. I've pushed this up here because it's a different idea. And if I can give anybody one piece of advice, it would be to absolutely stay humble and learn And if you're going to do stuff like that, expect that other people are going to have other opinions and take them on the chin a little bit. But absolutely reach out and use a network in the right and positive way is just a really important thing, particularly when you see stuff like that on LinkedIn. So I just really wanted to highlight that one. That is kind of my whistle stop tour. But I definitely wanted to leave a bit of time for some questions and just to have a bit of a chat with everybody. So if there are any questions, go for it. This is my LinkedIn. By all means, contact me. I'll be more than happy to have a chat with anybody. Very open with that.
Thank you very much, Kate, for your presentation. I loved it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute and ask, or you could type in the chat. I actually have a question, and it's for you. It's about motherhood and work. I don't have kids. I'm single, but I've spoken to some designers who are juggling kids and work, and I've always been kind of curious, like how was that for you? Like, how did you manage?
How was it? It was hard work. It is hard work. So my boys are 4 and 6, almost 6. To start with, it was relatively easy where I freelanced because I could shape that around what they were doing at the time. And obviously there were some significant periods of maternity leave amongst that. Now it's a lot easier, and I'm really fortunate with the team that I work with in that with my hours. I do work full-time hours. I think the nature of the way in which the world has gone has come up at the absolute right time for me.
Mm-hmm.
I work flexibly from home a lot of the time, or in different remote working locations, anywhere from London down to Bournemouth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's south coast of the UK. I think part of it is making a job role that is the right job role and being quite selective about that as well.
Mm.
That's another real big learning. When you go and interview, I think there's a real big thing about, are they going to choose me? But
Mm-hmm.
you need to flip that on its head and be like, do I want to choose them?
Mm-hmm.
And as a working parent, that choice is kind of amplified because you're not just making that choice for you, you're making that choice for your family as well. Am I going to a company that's going to support my family and support my choice to have a family? Because
Mm-hmm.
with being a working parent, right, you come with a whole different set of skills that just come by becoming a parent. I am more patient now infinitely than I was pre-parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think be mindful of the company that you go and work for. If it's a super young company run by a load of people who are not parents, they're probably not going to get it.
Mm.
If you're going to work with people who are parents themselves, have grown up children, have young children, are on that pathway, you're probably going to get a lot more support in it. So that would be my biggest bit of advice.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, and especially, I like what you said about you have to choose the employer. Don't let them choose you, because I think a lot of junior designers, when they're trying to go for their first job, they may not even know what they want in a job, or they don't know what kind of culture they should be looking for. So for people who are a little bit uncertain of what to expect for a UX role, what are some things that people should consider before investing their time and energy in chasing after a job?
Great question. Really, really glad you've asked it. The things that I would be asking in interviews, things that I'd be looking out for are things like the structure of the team. Who am I reporting into? What's their experience? Is this somebody that I'm going to be able to learn from? And these are the reason why I'm asking that is so to give you another example. I have worked as a UX designer with somebody who had absolutely no background in UX design at all.
Mm-hmm.
They came from a marketing and proposition background, and it actually made it super difficult because I wasn't learning from them. There was no bouncing back and forth of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But at interview, I asked the question, I got given the answer. That was my fault for not picking up on that.
Mm-hmm.
So team structure is a really important thing. Making sure that you are being surrounded by people who know the job and understand the job as well. It's going to help you as a junior progress. super wary of teams where you're the only UX UI designer and there isn't anybody, there are no other product designers, you're not reporting into a product lead. As a junior, you gotta have that mentoring. You need to have people who will help shape your career and who will understand the places that you have been and the mentality that you will be in at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely look for that.
Mm-hmm.
Culture is super personal. I think personally, to be creative, you need a place that understands what that creative process looks like and understands that. I know people who like to work freelance. A very good friend of mine's a UX UI designer, works in London in Soho House. He has a desk there. He likes to be, that's his place, right? That's where he goes. That's how he works. I like a bit more buzz. It's not unusual if I'm not in the office to be working in Starbucks. Because I need that energy around me if I need to be creative. That's just how I am. I love going up into London. I love that buzz. That's who and that's the kind of culture that I look for. I like being around quite small teams and have a bit of fun with it. Those are the things you've got to ask those questions that will give you that sense of who is this company, what do they want from me, and also what am I looking for, and are they going to be able to provide that. And you've only, interviewing is a hard thing, right? And when you're a junior starting out, still be selective about it and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you are selective, because that's really important.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And what you said about London, though, I could totally relate because I used to live in East London, like around like 2013, 2000 to 2015, like yeah, for like a few years. But yeah, Shoreditch was one of those places where it's like it's very creative. There's a lot of business going on, a lot of creative people, doing their hustles, lots of gigs, shows. So for me, like the job that I found there, it was perfect. Um, I was working at this place called like Cafe 1001. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was on Brick Lane. But yeah, I was there as like a graphic designer, and I was also like managing their digital communications. So yeah, like picking a job based on your interest, based on like if you just do a bit of research on the company that you're applying a job for, you might want to consider first of all like are they doing things that you care about? Like, does their value or their mission statement kind of relate with you? Because if that's like good for you, then I think that's like a good sign that like you're going after a job that's following your interest, you know. But still, like when you're on the interview, you still got to ask those questions to find out like yes, it looks like a very desirable place to work, but how do they communicate? How do they work together? I think that's kind of like the make or break is to see if the person interviewing can answer those questions adequately. Um, do we have any more questions for Kate or comments? Feel free to shout out or to use the text chat. I know I have some questions, but I also want to leave some room for anyone else who wants to have anything to say. Okay. Well, I think I have another question. I think this is more about Nourish Care. I don't know if you're able to show your work, but do you have samples of the work that you've done for Nourish Care, or is it, under embargo?
I'm afraid, due to the nature of what it is, because obviously we deal with quite
Yeah.
sensitive information.
Yeah.
I'm not actually able to share.
Mhm.
I mean, my job is very heavily about developing new features
Mm.
for the companies and new areas of the software. So just in case
Mhm.
there's any sneaky competitors on here, I'm
Mhm.
afraid I'm not actually able to share.
Yeah.
But for sure, we are all over LinkedIn, and our incredible CEO Nuno is about, and he talks quite freely and quite openly about some of the things that we're doing.
Mhm.
And he is on LinkedIn, and they do a lot of talks. So if anybody is interested in medical UX UI, then I can talk a bit about the mindset and how we go into that. But the specifics of what I do in the design, I'm afraid I'm not able to share.
Yeah.
But I think there was somebody I saw earlier who was interested in moving in that direction. So I don't know if they're online, but if they've got any questions, they're very welcome to ask them.
Yeah. I'm not sure who it was. I think it was either Lily or Hypatia. Hey guys. I know they're in the chat, but I think they're listening. As for questions about healthcare UX and UI, I'm not particularly good with like data visualization. I've never really worked on projects or practice, developing my skills in that kind of area. But what are some things that you learned at Nourish Care that helped you be a better UX designer and creating relevant features?
That's a great question. And actually, it's relevant across all of UX because the answer to it is exactly as most of us would do. Is that it comes down to what the user is asking us for,
Mhm.
and it means us watching really carefully about the feedback that we get. And we have a great feedback loop. Our client base are wonderful at coming back to us and saying, "Well, look, this isn't quite working for us, or we'd like to see this." I have a catch up weekly with one of our project managers, and she is amazing at saying to me, "This is, I've been out on the road, and this is what I'm being asked for." By keeping that open loop with our clients, I spend a lot more time instead of going, "Well, I think we should do this." I'm spending more time in what am I being asked for? Why am I being asked for it? What is the question that I need to answer? And go more down the problem solving route.
Mhm.
Having that amount of information available is always really difficult to then start making hierarchical choices. But because it's medical care, it gets a little bit easier in terms of actually what's the most important thing. And then you start organizing this in terms of, the importance and urgency.
Mhm.
And you go down those routes. And that kind of gives you that clarity to start making decisions in terms of how you organize not just your thought process but literally the screens in front of you to go, what is it that I need to get to people, and how quickly can I do that, how do I shape this, and that's where you start going down those lines.
Okay, sounds good. I also have another question, and it's more about how you handle interviews. Do you handle the UX research at Nourish Care, or is that like part of another team that looks at that, or do you just do everything?
So the way in which we get stuff back, so we have beta testers.
Mhm.
So we have a group of clients, depending on the feature that's being released. We do talk to our clients quite heavily about it, and they will go test features for us. So
Mhm.
from that side of testing, it's kind of covered in that way. I'm still kind of getting under the nuts and bolts of how we get to do testing. It is something that I would definitely like to be heavily involved in. I'm very much an end-to-end type designer,
Mhm.
and when it comes to research, I want to see what's going on out there, and I absolutely want to see what we're being asked for and why.
Mhm.
I literally had this conversation with my colleague on Friday
Mhm.
around getting out and talking to clients and why it's really important to get that first-hand experience of watching people actually use the platform.
Mhm.
One of the things that led me to want to do medical software in particular was the experience that I had with my children. So my youngest son was born 3 months premature,
Mhm.
and we spent a huge amount of time in hospital with him, and
Mhm.
across two hospitals. So 1 month in one hospital, which was very, very um, well funded and had computers at the end of computing terminals at the end of each cot. They're called moos.
Mhm.
Um, and it was, tech savvy, and I was able to see the text that they were using. The nurses were very happy for me to look at little ones' vitals and all of the information that was there. So I got a bit of a sense of how helpful they were finding that digital hand in it all.
Mhm.
And then he was transferred to a much smaller unit, which was all paper based,
Mhm.
and it was a completely different experience, a much slower experience.
Mhm.
Not necessarily bad. That's not a bad experience at all, but it was very, very different for sure. And that now shapes the way in which I approach things for a number of different reasons. Because we do talk with clients who are going from paper based into digital, and what the challenges are there, and then how you help the people that you're supporting at the end of all of those things come to terms with those changes.
Mhm.
And then those who are really tech savvy, and how you work with them to develop new features.
Mhm.
So experience is always a good thing, right? Always taking on board what your end user is effectively doing and what they're asking for.
Okay, thank you for that. I also have one more question, and I think I'll have all my questions answered. So it's about working with developers. Do you often have a close relationship with the development team at Nourish Care?
Yes. Yeah, for sure, for sure. 100%. I working with developers, which is, I think, these
Mm-hmm.
days quite a rare thing to hear
Mm-hmm.
a designer say.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned really early on, get your developers in a room really quickly with anything that you want to put on the table, because the worst thing in the world, and I have had this happen, is to go
Mm-hmm.
in there with an idea that you think is fantastic,
Yeah.
really well researched, really well thought out. You've done some early stage testing, you've put it in front of the developers, and they've gone, yeah, we can't do that. Or it's going to cost the
Mm-hmm.
earth in order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So with Nourish, the guys there, I effectively pitch my job to make their lives easier.
Mm-hmm.
My role is owning our design system, and I've been talking to them about, how we can have consistency across the platform as an example, and just working with them completely to make it as simpler and smoother transaction between us coming up with a solution to making that a reality. It sits in my world and in my gift to be able to say, I can make this for you for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And just by sitting down with them and asking them the pertinent questions in terms of, actually, if I do this, how difficult is it, or what do you guys think of this, or just explaining, I use this layout system for a reason, this is the reason, or talk to me about what your out of the box Android solution looks like, and how do I help design to make it easier for you to be able to produce things quickly. These are the conversations that you have to have with your development team, and you have to see them as a team that you've got one foot in,
Mm-hmm.
100%. So they're your team as well,
Mm-hmm.
and your teammates. So that's how I view it. I think I'm quite unusual from what I can tell in having that approach, but I would absolutely encourage you all. Not necessarily, you don't need to learn languages. I know a bit. I know enough to get by if I absolutely have to. I know enough to be able to explain myself.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't need it. It's so long as you build that relationship and you work on building that relationship, and it's a really important one to have.
Yeah, because I think that's a really important thing for new UX designers to understand, that when they're on the job, there's going to be constraints. So you might have the greatest idea ever, but if the development team says no, and there's pretty logical reasons why, it helps to design with them in mind, as well as your users. It's really difficult to figure out, like, whether your idea could actually be implemented, and it was just the development team that was lacking originality or lacking the skills. I don't know what it is, but sometimes there will be limitations where you can't really choose which developers you're going to be working with. You kind of have to work with the team and what it is that they're able to do. So you got to modify your designs a bit. So yeah, the stuff that you see on Dribble, it's like great, it looks nice, the UI is nice. However, if it's not, executable and it doesn't work for the user's experience, then you really have to think about, modifying and changing your designs. Sometimes you can't get your way, but sometimes you do. It's just a matter of changing your mindset. Um,
That's
yeah.
100% right. I mean, the only other thing that I would probably add to that is sometimes it's okay to push a little bit. It's
Mhm.
okay to be a bit cheeky. And I mean, you've got to, read the room and all that. But
Mhm.
sometimes it's okay to walk into that situation and go, I've had a really good idea, and actually I want to rewrite this design, and know that you're shooting for the moon a little bit. But if
Mhm.
you land on the roof, right, you've still had a step forward. Um, so sometimes it's okay to inspire as well, and inspire that change, but just know your audience, and know that you're likely to get backed down.
Mhm.
And I do all the time. I do push the envelope all the time and say, oh, I've thought about changing this, or could we do this, or could I change the colors on that, or have we had a look at this UI?
Mhm.
And I might mock up a few little different things, and I will get back down from it. But it's so of thoughts in someone's mind in terms of, well, actually,
Mhm.
perhaps we ought to take another look at that. And if that's all I've achieved, then great, I've achieved something.
Mhm. Yeah, you know what? This is not going to be the same for everyone, but I've personally worked with another mod of ours from the Collective Studio. His name is Chris. When we launched our website, he actually went out of his way to do some extra, I guess, what do you call it? Like, back end work? Not back end, but like, see, now I'm figuring out how to say this because I'm not a developer. But he found a way to see how our websites were performing in terms of their speed, and he was explaining all these different things about WordPress and how it affects your page load times, and it's like so informative, so amazing. Like my head was blown wide open. So I'm just saying, like, if you have conversations with developers and they explain to you like why a certain problem is happening, like ask them why it's happening, get them to show you the details, how it is that they come to these conclusions, and then you'll have a greater respect and understanding for what developers do. Because I think design and development, especially if you're building products, it goes hand in hand. So even if you don't have programming language skills like me, like I just totally fumbled with that one, but yeah, like as long as you're open to it and you can see what they see and understand what kind of issues that they're noticing, then you'll be able to like work in harmony with your developers. So please love your developers and respect them. They're like musicians sometimes. Anywho,
Yeah.
um, that's all the questions that I have. I'm not sure if anyone else who is kind of listening in, who just joined us, do you have any questions for our guest?
I mean, go for it. It can be absolutely anything.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, if anything comes up after this event is over, Kate, you have your LinkedIn account, right? Uh, can you maybe post it in the chat so that we could all see?
Yeah, for sure, I can
Yeah.
do that. And obviously, I'm now in the Collective Studio Discord, so feel free to friend me and message me. I'm more than happy to drop in anytime as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys got questions that you want to ask Kate a little bit later, feel free to reach out to her on LinkedIn or chat with her on Discord. Other than that, I think that kind of concludes our event. Very good presentation. So if you joined in a little bit late, we'll be posting the recap videos and audio in our recorded events channel. So yeah, thank you very much, Kate. It was a great
Thank you for
conversation.
having me.
Yeah. I hope to do this again. I think these kinds of events, people get a lot of value from it. We get like a lot of feedback from our members saying that they love hearing the stories of like senior designers. It helps them to think a little bit about their path. Yeah. So thank you. Have a good rest of your evening or afternoon, and we'll see you probably the rest of rest of the members. You'll probably see me again later next month. I'm gonna be hosting a talk with Brandon and Mallory. They're both senior designers. So be sure to check out our events. When more information about that event is coming up, you'll see in the announcements. Alrighty? And also, we have a design sprint starting the first week of June, on June 4th. So if you haven't bought a ticket yet, please consider buying one. We still have donation tickets left, so, you know, give it a shot. It's a really good experience. You'll learn a lot from our design sprints. Anywho, bye bye.
100%, guys. Do them.
See you.
Bye.